Dark Shadows. I love doing the show, but my gosh, it's a long time ago. I can remember that I never looked at the teleprompter. I remember I cut up a lot. A lot of people thought that I was Dan's kind of pet. In fact, I think Dan said that to me at one point. That's because he used to let me get away with a lot. I used to ad-lib and, and kid around and have fun with it. Most people didn't. Most people it was so serious. And I used to do things that would bother other actors, like Dr. Lang never knew his lines, okay? And he would put a tape on you or a little thing where his lines were, okay? Over on a desk, you'd have a line. And see, let's say that my shoulder was just off camera, this shoulder over here, which is just off camera, okay? Now, you can't see it, okay? But when he would be ready for his line, and it would be on my shoulder, and I would say, Dr. Lang, I've got the arm. It's at the cemetery, and all we have to do is go get it. And then his line would come up, and I would go, but tell me, Dr. Lang, you've got to let me know, what is it we do next? And he would be going, it was so great. And he was going, listen, Jeff. Listen, Jeff. And then finally he would just, I would do stuff like this. I had a lot of fun with it. I started out, when I first started doing the show, I was in a play off Broadway called MacBird, a political play that Stacy Keach played MacBird. Yes. Well, Bill Devane played Bobby. And we opened two companies. I opened in Boston, and he was in New York. And so that for a year, I never talked any other way but that. And that's what I was doing when Dan first saw me. And of course, he thought I stuttered and was from Boston, but But he cast me right away. And I had that first day paralysis of doing a soap opera. And I remember there are highlights. I was married to Jacqueline Smith for a long time, and when we first met, we met on an interview, and I knew that they were going to replace Alexandra Mulkey. So it was my entree to Jacqueline Smith, who was just a girl, there on an interview in New York, and a really pretty girl, and I said, excuse me, you would be great for the part of Victoria Winters. And she went, really? You're kidding? And that was my first conversation with her. She wouldn't do it. I remember Dan saw her, called me up and said, this girl, she's gorgeous. She can do it if she can walk and talk. Who cares? And then she wouldn't do it. And we went through a series of Alexandra Moltke replacements. When people used to ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would think about it, and I would say immortal, would be, because after all, what would anyone like to be? They'd like to live forever. And Dark Shadows was about that, if you think about it. It deals with the idea that the central theme was that you lived forever, which we would all like to do. There's a great line. A friend of mine named Hampton Fancher wrote a little screenplay for, it was a novella called Do Androids Love Electric Sheep? And they turned it into a movie called Blade Runner. And I don't think Hampton really got any money out of this. And I thought Blade Runner was terrific. But the last line in Blade Runner that Harrison Ford says is, he loves this android, this girl who is really a robot. And he says, she was really just like us. All she wanted to know was where she came from and how long she had, okay? Which is really the central thing in our lives. We think about, gee, when's my time coming? And I wish it weren't. And where we came from, so that you drifted back in time to people's other lives. Recently, a fortune teller. I take my 14-year-old and her pal, who is also 14, to a fortune teller. We're out in Los Angeles in the afternoon. We'd gone to the farmer's market to eat, and we go to see this fortune teller. And now, the little girl's father had died about 3 months, been dead about 3 months. He died at 41 years old, just keeled over. And we get into the fortune teller, And the fortune teller looks at my daughter, and she's going, "You're going to marry rich." You know the old stuff. Your daddy's good looking. But she gets to the little girl, picks up her hand, and says, "You've had a death in your family very recently." And you wonder how the little girl, of course, flew into tears, and you think, how can people know that? How can they tell the future? How can somebody, be psychic? All of these things are eminently fascinating to people. So Dark Shadows was about all of that. And we'd still be on if we hadn't run out of things for Barnabas to bite. I mean, if you think about it. Dan actually, at the end, he was going to bite tables. And no, I mean, there was, the show, we just ran out of story, and then began to repeat ourselves. And that was kind of tough. But it was great fun to do. If the show is off and nobody sees it, then how are they going to follow it? But somewhere, somehow, Dark Shadows has managed to stay on.